Okay, folks, buckle up. Today, on the Mysteria Archive, we dive into Ingo Swann, the artist the CIA paid to see Jupiter's rings and alleged moon structures. Fraud, genius, or something in between? Get ready for a wild ride. A lone corridor stretches under flickering lights. A door opens with a metallic groan. Inside, a man in a pressed suit slides a folder across the desk. The words stamped in bold red, "Top Secret." The folder opens. Inside, sketches of Jupiter's swirling storms, handwritten notes describing rings circling the planet, years before astronomers confirmed they even existed. A second page, littered with references to structures on the moon, craters that seem engineered, towers where no towers should stand. Here's the catch. The man who wrote them wasn't a NASA scientist. He wasn't even an astronaut. He never left Earth. His name was Ingo Swann, an artist, a psychic, and perhaps the strangest weapon the CIA ever recruited. During the Cold War, when paranoia stretched from Washington to Moscow, America turned to something stranger than any science fiction novel, the human mind. What Swann claimed to see shattered the boundaries of space, time, and reality itself. But here's the question. Was he a fraud, a visionary, or proof that our consciousness can reach farther than rockets ever could? Tonight, we unravel the story of Ingo Swann, the CIA's secret psychic weapon. Okay, let's just pause here. Imagine being a government agent in the 1970s, opening a file, and instead of missile blueprints or spy photos, you get a doodle of Jupiter's rings by some guy from Colorado who says he saw them in his head. You'd either laugh or panic. And honestly, that's what makes this story so addictive. It's not just sci-fi nonsense. These experiments were funded, documented, and kept classified for decades. Which means, at some point, someone in power thought, yeah, let's roll with the psychic guy. And hey, it's the Cold War. America's worried the Soviets have mind readers on the payroll. So, what do? Hire your own. It's either genius or the most expensive Ouija board session in history. The Cold War's strangest weapon. The 1970s were years of tension. The Cold War wasn't fought only with bombs and tanks. It was fought with whispers, rumors, and shadows. Washington believed Moscow had already begun exploring psychic warfare. Soviet scientists were reportedly testing telekinesis, mind reading, and even the ability to see distant military sites without leaving a chair. And if the Soviets had it, the Americans wanted it too, because in the Cold War, even the impossible was worth investigating. Enter the birth of what became known as the Stargate Project. This was no Saturday morning science club. It was a classified program backed by the CIA and the Department of Defense. Its purpose? To explore what they called remote viewing, the alleged ability to describe or sketch a target location hidden from view, sometimes thousands of miles away. On paper, it sounded ridiculous. Psychic spies? Minds peering through walls and oceans. But the paranoia of the Cold War made it plausible enough. After all, the US had already poured money into stranger experiments, from truth serums to mind control research, so why not? Researchers at the Stanford Research Institute in California were brought into the fold. They began recruiting volunteers, testing claims of psychic ability. Most failed, some produced vague results. But then, one man stood out. A painter, a writer, an eccentric who spoke of the mind as if it were a telescope pointed at infinity. That man was Ingo Swann. And for the CIA, he wasn't just interesting, he was potentially invaluable. Because even if a fraction of what he claimed was true, then the battlefield had just shifted from missiles and tanks to the human mind. All right, let's be honest, the Cold War made governments do some weird stuff. Now, when you're terrified the other side might have psychic soldiers bending spoons and spying from their couches, you throw a little cash at your own program, just in case. It's like buying your insurance policy for your paranoia. And here's the kicker. Most of the psychics they tested, total duds. But then comes Swann, this guy who's not only confident, but eerily accurate in ways that made scientists scratch their heads. Suddenly, the idea doesn't look so silly. It's like when your friend brags about being great at poker and you roll your eyes until he cleans out the whole table. Then you're thinking, wait, is he lucky or is he counting cards? That's Ingo Swann in a nutshell. Who was Ingo Swann? Before Ingo Swann became the CIA's not-so-secret weapon, He was something far less intimidating, an artist. Born in 1933 in Telluride, Colorado, Swann grew up fascinated not just by the mountains around him, but by the unseen worlds of imagination. He studied biology and art, moved to New York City, and spent years painting, sculpting, and mingling with the avant-garde scene. But Swann wasn't just a bohemian artist. He also immersed himself in parapsychology, exploring psychic phenomena and altered states of consciousness. Friends described him as eccentric but unusually disciplined, someone who treated psychic experiences not as mystical visions but as data to be observed and catalogued. What set Swann apart was this unique blend of creativity and rigour. Many psychics of the era relied on vague pronouncements or mystical language. Swann, by contrast, spoke clearly, logically, even scientifically about what he experienced. He didn't just say, "I saw something." He described shapes, patterns, textures, colours. He treated psychic perception like a tool, something that could be sharpened and tested. This quality made him stand out to researchers at the fringes of science. By the late 1960s, Swann was already experimenting with out-of-body perception, claiming to see hidden objects or describe distant locations. He began publishing papers, writing books, and attracting the attention of scientists curious about whether the human mind really had untapped powers. To skeptics, Swann was just another New York eccentric dabbling in pseudoscience. But to others, he was something much more rare, a psychic who wanted to be measured, studied, and verified. And when the CIA came looking for someone who might help them explore the strange new frontier of psychic espionage, it wasn't the self-proclaimed prophets they turned to, it was Ingo Swann, the artist who thought the mind could be mapped like a landscape. So here's the thing, most psychics in the 1970s were, let's be honest, a little out there. Lots of crystals, vague predictions, and your aura looks a bit cloudy today. But Swann? He was different. He approached psychic claims like he was prepping for a science fair. Charts, data, test conditions. You almost expect him to say, "Please peer review my telepathy." And that's exactly why the CIA liked him. They weren't looking for someone who'd predict your horoscope. They wanted someone who could sit down, focus, and produce information that could be compared against reality. Of course, that still doesn't answer the big question. Was Swann legit, or just a very convincing performer? Well, the tests at Stanford Research Institute would soon put him under the microscope, literally. The first tests. In the early 1970s, Ingo Swann arrived at the Stanford Research Institute in California. There he met physicists Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, two scientists who had secured funding to study extrasensory perception under controlled conditions. Swann wasn't the first psychic they tested, but he quickly became the most intriguing. In one experiment, he was asked to describe objects sealed inside opaque envelopes. Without seeing them, he sketched shapes that matched surprisingly well. In another, he described the inside of a laboratory, including details hidden behind locked doors. Now, perhaps the most famous early test was in 1972. At the National Security Agency, NSA, Swann was asked to remote view a hidden target. His description included a metallic structure underground, later confirmed to be part of a classified installation. Even hardened intelligence officers raised their eyebrows. And what impressed researchers wasn't just that Swann sometimes got things right, it was the way he did it. He didn't speak in riddles or vague guesses. He described textures, temperatures, spatial relationships, and even drew diagrams. His reports could be checked against real data. Of course, skeptics argue that many of his hits were simply good guesses, or the result of subtle cues given by the experimenters. But there were enough uncanny moments that Targ and Puthoff believed they had found something worth pursuing. Swann's work at SRI convinced the CIA to take remote viewing seriously, at least enough to fund a program that would later become known as the Stargate Project. For the first time, psychic ability wasn't being tested at a carnival or seance. It was being tested under government contracts, in laboratories, with scientists keeping score. And at the centre of it all sat Ingo Swann, pencil in hand, sketching visions from a distance. Imagine being at that NSA test. You've got your hidden structure, nobody knows what it is, and this artist turned psychic casually says, "Yeah, there's a metallic chamber underground." Cue the agents in the room dropping their coffee. Now, could Swann have been guessing? Sure. Could he have been super observant, reading body language or subtle cues? Also possible, but That's what makes it fun. Every skeptic's explanation has to account for the fact that his results kept surprising people who really didn't want to be surprised. And remember, this wasn't for party tricks. The CIA doesn't hire you to guess what card someone's holding. They wanted strategic, actionable intel. And at least for a while, Swann gave them enough to keep funding rolling. The question was, how far could this actually go? The Jupiter Vision. In 1973, Ingo Swann was invited to attempt something extraordinary, to leave Earth, not physically, but with his mind. Under controlled conditions, he was asked to remote view the planet Jupiter. At the time, very little was known about Jupiter, beyond what telescopes could show. No spacecraft had yet sent back detailed images. Swann sat quietly, pencil in hand, and began to describe what he claimed to see: a vast planet swirling with storms, an atmosphere far denser than Earth's. He sketched patterns and made notes: intense bands of radiation, icy crystals in the upper atmosphere, and, the most striking of all, rings. Yes, rings around Jupiter. Now, here's where things get interesting. In December of 1973, just months after Swann's session, NASA's Pioneer 10 spacecraft reached Jupiter. Among the data it transmitted back was confirmation that Jupiter did in fact have faint rings, something no astronomer had ever confirmed before. Now, to believers, this was proof. How could Swann, an artist in New York, possibly have known what the world's most advanced spacecraft would only soon reveal? To skeptics, it was a lucky guess, dressed up with lots of imaginative detail. After all, rings exist around Saturn. Maybe Swann simply assumed other gas giants had them too. But whether it was luck, intuition, or something more, the Jupiter vision gave Swann credibility. Inside the secretive Stargate program, his work began to be taken more seriously. Scientists who were skeptical now had to pause. Had the CIA really found a man who could see across space, into worlds no human had ever visited? Or was Swann just a brilliant storyteller whose timing made him look like a prophet? Okay, so let's get this straight. Ingo Swann calls rings around Jupiter before NASA even knows they're there. That's like predicting your neighbour's going to paint their car neon pink, and then next week, boom, hot pink sedan on the driveway. Now, skeptics will say, well, Saturn has got rings. Maybe it's just a good guess. Sure, maybe. But the timing, that's what makes people lean in closer. And you've got to imagine the scientists in the room. These are no-nonsense guys, the kind who run experiments with clipboards and stopwatches. And here's Swann, doodling space jewellery on Jupiter, and then NASA backs him up. That's either the coincidence of the century, or the CIA just found themselves a psychic astronaut. Lunar Secrets. After Jupiter, Ingo Swann's visions grew stranger. In another remote viewing session, he turned his attention closer to home, the Moon. But what he described wasn't the barren, lifeless rock we've all seen in the photographs. Swann claimed to see structures, domes, towers, and what looked like artificial constructions scattered across the lunar surface. He described them in detail: geometric patterns, lights, and even tunnels. In his sketches, the Moon wasn't just a celestial body, it was occupied. He went further. Swann said he sensed activity there, beings who were not human, who seemed aware of his psychic presence. He claimed they noticed him and that he felt watched in return. It was as if, by peering into their world, he'd crossed a line. Official science, of course, rejected these claims outright. NASA's photos showed craters and dust, not domes and towers. But among conspiracy circles, Swann's lunar visions became legendary. Could there be bases on the far side of the Moon, hidden from Earth? Could governments know more than they admit? For the CIA, Swann's lunar claims were filed alongside his other work, not dismissed outright, but not treated as intelligence either. Yet, they added to his mystique, because unlike his Jupiter vision, which found an eerie echo in NASA data, the Moon stories remained unconfirmed. Were Swann's lunar visions symbolic, a psychic imagination running wild? Or had he glimpsed something humanity wasn't meant to see? Alright, now this is where Swann's story really goes full sci-fi paperback. Rings on Jupiter? Okay, maybe. But moon bases with beings giving him the side eye? That's a whole other level. Still, you can see why people love this part. It takes the mystery and cranks it up. Because if Swann was right about Jupiter, then maybe, just maybe, you start to wonder, what if he was right about the Moon too? And let's be honest, if there really were domes and towers up there, do you think NASA would be rushing to tell us? Or would it quietly disappear into a classified folder marked "Do Not Release Until Never"? At the very least, it makes you tilt your head up next time you look up at the night sky. Inside Stargate, Psychic Spy. By the mid-1970s, Ingo Swann was no longer just an eccentric artist dabbling in parapsychology. He was on the CIA's radar, literally. After his experiments at Stanford Research Institute, he was recruited into a classified program that would become known as Stargate. The premise was as bold as it was bizarre. Use remote viewing for intelligence gathering. Instead of satellites or spies in trench coats, imagine a handful of people sitting in a room, sketching what they saw thousands of miles away. Swann was asked to describe Soviet military sites, nuclear facilities, even submarines hidden in secret bases. In some cases, his drawings eerily resembled the actual layouts later confirmed by reconnaissance. Reports note he described a large gantry crane inside a Soviet installation, details confirmed years later by declassified photos. But here's the catch. Not every session worked. Sometimes the results were vague, dreamlike, or flat out wrong. One day, Swann might produce a sketch that left analysts astonished. The next, he'd hand in something that looked more like modern art than military intel. Inside intelligence circles, debates raged. Was this a breakthrough in human potential or a costly detour in pseudoscience? Some argued even a small percentage of accurate hits could justify the project. After all, one lucky detail could change the course of an operation. Others saw it as a distraction from hard evidence. For Swann, though, the work was vindication. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of one of the strangest intelligence experiments in history. Whether he was producing miracles or nonsense, the CIA kept him around. Because what if, just what if, it worked? Alright, picture this. While James Bond is out driving an Aston Martin, Ingo Swann is in a quiet office doodling submarines on scratch paper. Not quite the spy movie we're used to. But that's the wild part. Sometimes those doodles actually matched reality, and the CIA's thinking was simple. If Swann could get it right even 10% of the time, that 10% might be worth millions in satellite programs. It's like playing the lottery. Usually you lose, but when you win, you really win. Of course, the misses were just as spectacular. You can imagine the analysts rolling their eyes when his target location looked like abstract art. But hey, in the Cold War, paranoia meant you chased every lead, even psychic ones. The Fall and the Legacy. By the 1990s, the Cold War was over, and so was patience for unusual programs like Stargate. After more than 2 decades of classified work, the project was declassified and quietly shut down. The official reason? Remote viewing had failed to produce actionable intelligence. In the blunt words of a government report, it simply wasn't reliable enough. On paper, that was the end of the story. Psychic spies had been tried, tested, and dismissed. But, as with all things involving secrecy, not everyone bought into the official version. Some insiders claimed success rates were far higher than reported, and that the failure narrative was just a convenient way to bury something too volatile to keep in the open. For Ingo Swann, the declassification was bittersweet. On one hand, he was free to talk about his experiences. He published books detailing his work and theories about human consciousness, arguing that the mind was an unexplored frontier as vast as space itself. On the other, the dismissal stung. Years of his life had been reduced to a footnote in Cold War history. But Swann's legacy refused to disappear. His Jupiter prediction kept skeptics and believers arguing for decades. His moon visions inspired countless conspiracy theories, and his role in Stargate cemented him as one of the most unusual figures in intelligence history. Whether you see him as a fraud, a genius, or simply a man caught between science and myth, one thing is certain. Ingo Swann ensured that the question of psychic potential would never be dismissed so easily again. Now, you've got to hand it to the government. Now, he loved the phrase, "nothing to see here." When Stargate was declassified, the line was basically, yeah, we tried psychic spies, but it was useless, moving on. And yet, people can't shake the feeling that's too neat of an ending. Because if the whole thing was a flop, why keep it running for over 20 years? Governments don't exactly fund fun little hobbies for decades. Now, Swann himself certainly didn't think it was a waste. He doubled down, insisting we'd only scratched the surface of what the mind could do. Was he right? It's hard to say. But if nothing else, he left behind one heck of a rabbit hole for the rest of us to chase. Closing thoughts: the mystery that remains. Ingo Swann's story sits on the razor's edge between science and myth. To some, he was a master of suggestion, an artist with a flair for the dramatic who happened to ride the wave of Cold War paranoia. To others, he was a pioneer who cracked open the door to an unexplored frontier of the human mind. What makes his story so enduring is that it refuses to settle. The Jupiter vision still sparks debate. His lunar sketches still fuel speculation. And the classified work he did with the CIA ensures that no matter what the official line may be, there will always be questions lingering in the shadows. And was remote viewing ever truly an effective tool for intelligence? Or was Stargate a costly detour into wishful thinking? Did Swann genuinely perceive things beyond his senses, or did he simply strike gold with coincidence at the right moments? The truth may never be pinned down. But maybe that's the point. Swann himself argued that consciousness is the last great frontier, one we barely understand. And whether you see him as a fraud, a visionary, or something in between, his story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what it really means to be human. Because if the mind is capable of more than we think, then what else lies hidden, waiting to be discovered? Here's what I love about Ingo Swann. He leaves you dangling. You can't wrap him up neatly as a fraud or a genius. He's both believable and unbelievable at the same time. And let's face it, if the CIA poured money into psychic spies for 2 decades, at the very least, someone in a suit thought, hey, this might actually work. That alone is fascinating. So, was Swann the real deal? Maybe, maybe not. But he certainly made us think bigger, and at the very least, gave us one heck of a story. Now, if you're one of the lucky few to have the hype button below, please smash it 3 times and it will help boost this video. I'd really appreciate it as we're trying to chase down 100,000 subscribers. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to let me know in the comments below of videos you would like to see next. Okay, my friends, be safe, and until next time, stay curious.